Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight I have another creepy story for you, but before we dive in, if you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to explore in the next videos, leave a comment down below. I love reading your suggestions. Thank you so much. Buying a foreclosed home always feels like you're moving into someone else's unfinished life. My house, situated on a gentle slope at the end of Hemlock Hill, was no exception. It was suspiciously cheap, but I was so tired of my cramped city apartment and craved quiet so desperately that I ignored every warning sign. It was an old two-story house with white paint that had started to peel and a porch wide enough to hold an entire family. For me, a 32-year-old freelance writer named Leo, it was a new beginning. The first few days passed in a blur of boxes, the smell of new paint, and the deafening silence of the countryside. It was in that silence that I began to notice the traces of the former owners. They hadn't just left behind the usual things, an old lamp in the basement, a few rolls of wallpaper in a closet. No, what they left behind was far more personal. In the top drawer of a kitchen cabinet stuck way in the back, I found a photo album. Its leather cover was frayed, but inside the pictures were still crisp. They documented the life of a family, a man, a woman, and a young daughter. They looked happy. They were smiling at picnics, opening presents on Christmas, blowing out birthday candles. I turned page after page, feeling like an intruder, spying on memories that weren't mine. I was about to close it and put it away when I reached the last page. This page held a single photograph, taken more recently than the others. The family was standing in the front yard, but they weren't smiling. They were staring directly at the house. Their expressions were blank, almost lifeless. The little girl was pointing, not at the house in general, but seemingly at a specific window. I squinted, realizing it was the window to my office, the very room where I was sitting. And then an icy chill shot down my spine. The photo was taken from a strange angle, almost from inside a bush at the edge of the property, as if the photographer was hiding. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. In the bottom corner of the photo, written in a child's messy scrawl, was a single sentence. "Daddy says we'll be home soon." I tried to push the photograph from my mind, telling myself it was just a coincidence, an overactive imagination fueled by loneliness and the new environment. I packed the album away in a box in the basement, determined to forget it. But the house didn't seem to want me to forget. I started noticing other, smaller things. While repainting the living room, I discovered faint etchings on the wall beneath the old paint. They weren't a child's scribbles. They were tally marks grouped in sets of 5, like how a prisoner counts the days, hundreds of them, covering almost an entire wall behind where the sofa had been. In the child's bedroom, I found a drawing stuffed behind a loose baseboard. It was done in crayon, depicting a stick figure house with 3 figures waving from inside. But outside the house, there was a 4th figure alone, looking in. What unsettled me was how the child had drawn the doors and windows. They were crossed out with thick black lines as if they'd been boarded shut. The unease crept into my daily routine. I found myself checking the door locks multiple times before bed. The house's silence no longer felt peaceful. It began to feel heavy, expectant. Sometimes, while working late, I'd get the feeling that someone was watching me from outside, from the darkness of the woods that bordered the property. I would look out, but all I'd see was my own reflection in the dark window pane. Things came to a head one Tuesday night. I was in the kitchen making a cup of tea when I heard a noise from upstairs. It wasn't the usual creak of an old house settling. It was a deliberate sound, a soft dragging as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Chance, my German shepherd, rose from his spot, the fur on his neck bristling, and let out a low growl toward the staircase. I grabbed the heaviest butcher knife from the block, my hand trembling. With Chance leading the way, I slowly went up the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. The upstairs was dark and silent. I flipped on all the lights, moving from room to room. The master bedroom empty, the bathroom empty, the child's room also empty. I let out a breath of relief, feeling foolish. But then I noticed it. The small door to the attic, which I had never opened, was ajar. A draft of cold, musty air seeped out. I knew I should turn around, call someone, but I couldn't. I pushed the door open. The air was thick and stagnant. Light from the hallway spilled in, illuminating a pile of old blankets and pillows in a corner. Beside them were a few empty soup cans, a couple of water bottles, and a bucket. Someone had been living up here. And they had been here recently. Lying on the pile of blankets was a rag doll, identical to the one the little girl in the photos had been holding. It was staring right at me. That was the final straw. I couldn't spend another night in that house. The very next morning, I called a moving company, telling them to come get my things as soon as possible. I packed my essentials into my car, threw a sleeping bag in the back seat, and decided I would stay in a motel until everything was sorted out. I didn't care about the money anymore. I just wanted out. That night, I drove back to the house one last time to grab some important documents I'd forgotten. As I drove up the dirt road, I noticed something was wrong. All the lights in the house were on, though I was certain I had turned everything off. My heart seized. I parked my car at the bottom of the road, hidden by a line of trees, and walked up the hill, sticking to the shadows. As I got closer, I could see them through the living room window. The family. The man, the woman, and the little girl. They were moving through the house with an easy familiarity, as if they'd never left. The woman was rearranging the books on my shelves. The man was adjusting a picture on the wall. The child was sitting on the floor playing with the rag doll. They weren't talking. They just moved, silently and methodically, erasing my presence and restoring their own. I backed away into the darkness, my whole body trembling. I fumbled for my phone to call the police, but then a terrible realization hit me. They hadn't broken in. They didn't smash a window or pick a lock. They had simply let themselves in. They had a key, or they had never really left at all. I scrambled back to my car, my heart hammering against my ribs. As I started the engine, the headlights swept across the front of the house. For a brief moment, all three of them stopped what they were doing. They turned their heads in unison and looked directly at me. Their faces were expressionless, not angry, not surprised. Just a cold, empty blankness, as if I were a minor annoyance that had just been removed. They didn't chase me. They just stood there in my house and watched me leave. The police came. They searched the house, but it was empty. No sign of anyone. No fingerprints other than my own. The photo album was gone. So was the pile of blankets in the attic. Everything was neat, clean, except for my packed boxes. The officer looked at me with a mixture of pity and disbelief, asking if I was sure I wasn't just under a lot of stress, that maybe the move had gotten to me. I never went back. I let the moving company get my things. I sold the house at a major loss to an investment firm that didn't even bother to ask why I was selling so quickly. I never told anyone the full story. They wouldn't have believed it. Sometimes, I'm not even sure I believe it myself. 6 months have passed. I'm living in a small apartment in a different city, hundreds of miles from Hemlock Hill, but I can't settle. Every time I hear a floorboard creak or see a shadow pass my window, the fear rises in my throat. I've lost the sense of security a home is supposed to provide. Last week, on some morbid impulse, I looked up my old address online. I found a short local news article. The house had been sold again, to a young couple looking for a quiet place to start a family. I looked at their picture, smiling brightly on the front steps, full of hope. And I wondered if they'd found the photo album yet. I wondered if they'd noticed the tally marks on the wall. I wondered how long it would take them to realize that they were never truly alone in that house. Because I understand now, that family didn't just want their house back. They needed it, and they would do anything, wait for as long as it took in the shadows to make sure no one else could ever have it. I survived, but I didn't truly escape. Like them, I am a ghost now too, haunted by a place I once called home, forever on the outside looking in. Moving was supposed to be a release. For me, it was a desperate attempt to reclaim my life. The old apartment in Denver had become a prison filled with the ghosts of a dead relationship, where every corner whispered Maya's name. So I did what any man at the end of his rope would do. I packed my things, loaded them into a rental truck, and drove 8 hours to a small, nameless town in Utah, a place I hoped she would never find. The new house was the complete opposite of our old apartment. It was modern, minimalist, with white walls and polished concrete floors. Its most prominent feature, and the reason I chose it, was the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked a barren backyard and, beyond that, the vast desert. I thought the open space and abundant light would cleanse the dark memories. I thought I could see anyone or anything coming from miles away. I was terribly wrong. The first week passed in a chaotic blur of cardboard boxes and furniture shopping trips. I was starting to feel something resembling peace. The silence of the desert at night was profound, a stark contrast to the relentless noise of the city. I slept well for the first time in months. Things started to change on a Tuesday evening. I was unpacking the last box, one filled with miscellaneous items from my old desk drawer, when I saw it. Lying beneath a tangle of old charging cables and dried-up pens was a small, silver heart-shaped locket. It was Maya's, the one I had given her for our one-year anniversary. My blood ran cold. I remembered very clearly leaving all of her things in a box at the old apartment. I had asked the landlord to throw it away. There was no reason for it to be here in this box in this house. I told myself it was just a mistake. Maybe it had accidentally fallen into my things long before we broke up. I tried to believe that. I threw the locket in the trash, the weight of it in my palm feeling unnervingly heavy. But that night, the peaceful sleep was gone. I kept staring at the large glass windows, and for the first time, they didn't feel open but exposed. In the following days, a sense of unease crept into every corner of my new home. Small things started happening. Things that would be easy to dismiss if they occurred in isolation, but together, they painted a disturbing picture. One morning, I couldn't find my car keys. I always hung them on a hook by the door. After 10 frantic minutes of searching, I found them on the kitchen counter right next to the coffee maker. I was certain I hadn't left them there. Another time, I came home from grocery shopping and caught a faint scent in the air. It was Maya's perfume, a fragrance of jasmine and sandalwood that I had once loved. But now it made my stomach clench. I scoured the house, but the scent vanished as quickly as it had appeared. I began to question my own sanity. The stress of the breakup, the pressure of starting over. Maybe it was all getting to me. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger, especially at night. Sitting in the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just outside, in the darkness of the backyard, looking in through the giant pane of glass. I started drawing the curtains as soon as the sun set, turning my open space into a suffocating cocoon. The final straw was finding a long, dark strand of hair on my pillow. My hair is short and light. It was her hair. There was no doubt anymore. She had been in my house. She had been in my bedroom. The next day, I had a security system installed. 4 cameras were placed at each corner of the house, along with motion sensors on all doors and windows. I got an app on my phone that allowed me to watch the live feed and receive alerts for any movement. That night, as I armed the system, a part of the weight lifted. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I had proof. Now I just had to wait. My relief was short-lived. 3 days passed without a single alert from the security system. No motion, no signs of a break-in. Yet the strange things continued. A book I was halfway through was placed face down on the coffee table, though I remembered leaving it face up. The TV remote vanished from its usual spot and reappeared in a kitchen drawer. These incidents were too small to trigger the alarm system, but they were enough to drive me insane. It was as if she was playing a game with me, one designed to make me unravel from the inside out. She didn't want to hurt me physically. She wanted to destroy my mind. I became obsessed with reviewing the security footage. I rewound hours of video, searching for a passing shadow, a slightly ajar door, but there was nothing. The house was always empty when I was away. Not a single frame showed anyone else there. One evening on my way home from work, I received an email from the security company informing me of a mandatory system update that would take the cameras offline for about 2 hours that night. I didn't think much of it. That was a mistake. The next morning, I walked into the living room and my heart stopped. On the stark white wall opposite the sofa, which had been bare the day before, now hung a framed photograph. It was a picture of Maya and me, taken on a vacation in Colorado. We were both smiling, looking happy and carefree, but something was horribly wrong. My face in the photograph had been deliberately scratched out, leaving jagged white gashes where my eyes and smile used to be. I rushed to my phone, opened the security app, and checked the footage from last night. Just as the email had stated, there was a 2-hour gap in the recording, precisely during the time the system was supposedly updating. It was then that I understood. The email was fake. She had hacked my system. She had disabled the cameras so she could enter the house, hang that picture on the wall, and then vanish without a trace. She wasn't just in my house. She was controlling my perception of reality. I had no proof. If I called the police, they would think I was crazy. She had trapped me perfectly. I knew I couldn't stay in that house another night. The feeling of safety was completely shattered. My sanctuary had been irrevocably violated. I decided I would pack a bag and go to a hotel, then figure out how to sell the house. I needed a few things, so I drove to the only department store in town. I would only be gone for about an hour. Before I left, I took a simple precaution of my own. I took a thin piece of thread and stretched it across the very bottom of the front door, taping the ends discreetly. If the door was opened, the thread would break. It wasn't a high-tech alarm system, but it was something she wouldn't expect. When I returned, the sunset was painting the desert sky red. I got out of the car, my heart pounding in my chest. I bent down and looked. The thread was broken. A cold chill ran down my spine despite the still warm air. She was inside. Right now. Every instinct in me screamed to get back in the car and drive away, to call the police. But another part of me, a part tired of being scared and cornered, needed to confront this. I needed it to be over. I gently pushed the door open. The house was unnaturally silent. The last light of the day streamed through the large windows, casting everything in a fiery orange glow. I stepped through the entryway and stopped dead. My living room was gone. In its place, the space had been meticulously rearranged to look exactly like the living room in our old apartment in Denver. Our worn-out navy blue sofa, the faux Persian rug we bought at a flea market, the floor lamp with the tilted shade, even the stack of old magazines on the coffee table. Every detail was horrifyingly accurate. And then I saw her. Maya was sitting on that sofa, her back to me, looking out the window toward the desert as it faded into darkness. She was wearing the dress she wore on our first date. She didn't turn around, but she knew I was there. Her silence was more terrifying than any threat. "I thought we could try again," she said, her voice soft and calm, a complete contradiction to the insanity of the scene before me. Somewhere new, but I realized I don't want a new beginning. I want what we had. She slowly stood up and turned to face me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were empty yet haunting. For a moment I couldn't move, paralyzed by the sheer absurdity of it all. She had rented a truck, driven 8 hours, broken into my house multiple times, all to recreate a dead memory. My paralysis broke when I noticed what she was holding in her hand. It wasn't a weapon. It was a key. My house key. I didn't stay to hear anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply turned and ran. I ran out of that house, jumped into my car, and drove away as fast as I could, not daring to look back even once. I didn't stop until I reached the police station in the next county. When the officers arrived at the house, they found everything just as I had described. The rearranged living room, the scratched photograph, and Maya still there, sitting on the sofa waiting. It's been 6 months since that night. Maya is in a psychiatric facility and I have a long-term restraining order. I sold that house at a loss. I couldn't bear to go back there for even a second. I live in a small apartment in a different city now, one without large windows. I keep the curtains drawn even during the day. I've had all the locks changed 3 times. I don't drive at night anymore. The silence of the open road no longer brings me peace. It just makes me feel exposed. I survived, but I don't feel like I won. Because sometimes, in the quietest moments of the night, I still get that feeling. The feeling that I'm not alone. And when I look in the mirror, I can't help but wonder if a part of her madness has latched onto me. She was caught, but her ghost still lives in my mind. A constant reminder that the most terrifying monsters don't hide in the shadows. They're the people we once loved. My first home. That phrase was supposed to bring a sense of pride and accomplishment. And it did, for the first week. I had signed all the papers, received the keys, and stood alone in the empty living room, where the smell of new paint was still strong. It was a modest 2-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac in a newly developed suburban area. Behind the house was a dense forest that stretched to the horizon. For me, a freelance graphic designer, this quiet was paradise. I spent the first week arranging furniture, turning the blank walls into my own space and enjoying the silence I had craved. The unease began subtly. It was a Tuesday afternoon, as the golden sunlight streamed through my second-floor office window. I was looking out, watching a hawk circle above the treetops, when something caught my eye. On the wooden window frame, right near the edge of the glass, there was a tiny hole, no bigger than a pinhead. Curious, I pressed my eye to it. It went straight through the wood. I checked the other windows. They all had similar small holes, deliberately drilled and almost invisible if you weren't looking for them. My first thought was that perhaps this was part of the design. or a mark from the installation process, but they were too random, too unprofessional. There was a hole in the bedroom window frame, another in the living room, and even one on the sliding glass door leading to the backyard. They were always in positions that offered the most comprehensive view inside. A chill ran down my spine, an irrational thought that someone had made these peepholes. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was overreacting. A new house always has its quirks, but the feeling of being watched clung to me. I started closing the curtains as soon as dusk fell. I felt hesitant to walk around the house without being fully clothed. The silence I once cherished now felt heavy, filled with imagined sounds I couldn't place. I reassured myself that it was just the anxiety of moving to a new place, that my brain was just getting used to the house's noises. But deep down, a primal fear was taking root. I had bought a house, but perhaps it had never truly been mine. 2 weeks passed. I had tried to forget about the holes in the windows and return to a normal rhythm of life. Work piled up and focusing on projects helped dispel the vague fears. Until a Friday morning. I woke up, went down to the kitchen to make coffee as usual. But something was different. The blue ceramic mug I always left on the right side of the coffee machine was now on the left. My heart began to pound. I was certain I hadn't moved it. I lived alone, and I was a person of almost rigid habits. Maybe I was absent-minded. Maybe I was overly tired. I came up with 100 logical explanations, but none of them truly settled my mind. I walked around the house, checking the doors and windows. Everything was locked tight, exactly as I had left it the night before. No signs of a break-in. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the small incidents continued. A book on the coffee table was turned to a different page. The TV remote was on the floor instead of the couch. The sneakers I left by the door were perfectly arranged, something I never did. Each of these small changes was like a malicious whisper, saying that I was not alone. Someone had been in my house. They didn't take anything. They just moved things. A subtle assertion of presence and control. The horror wasn't in what was missing, but in what was disturbed. The climax came on a night of torrential rain. I was working late in my office and decided to go to bed. When I walked into the bathroom, I froze. My toothbrush was wet. Not just damp, but soaking wet, as if someone had just used it minutes before. My breath caught in my chest. I hadn't been in the bathroom since the morning. There were no more logical explanations. Someone had been in my house using my things, moving through my private space while I was unaware. The fear turned into a cold rage. I had to find out what was happening. That evening, I placed a small security camera, the kind often used for monitoring babies, on a bookshelf in the living room, aimed at the front door and the staircase. I didn't know what I expected to see, but I knew I couldn't live in this state of suspicion for another day. I reviewed the footage the next morning with a heavy heart. Most of it was just static, empty shots. But then, around 3 a.m., a figure appeared in the frame. The person didn't come in through the front door or a window. They emerged from the wall under the stairs where there was a small storage closet. A man, thin and wearing dark clothes, moved through my house with a terrifying familiarity. He went into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, then wandered through the living room, touching my belongings, even sitting in my favorite armchair for a few minutes before returning and disappearing back into the closet. I felt nauseous. This person wasn't breaking into my house. He was living here. I rushed to the closet under the stairs, yanking the door open. Inside, behind a few old boxes I hadn't unpacked, the back wall looked loose. I pushed hard. A large section of drywall shifted easily, revealing a dark space behind it. A musty old smell hit me. Using my phone's flashlight, I shone it inside. It was a narrow space, a gap between the walls that shouldn't have existed. And in it, there was a filthy mattress, a few empty water bottles, and expired food packages. There was even a plastic bucket used as a makeshift toilet. But the thing that made my blood freeze wasn't any of that. Taped to the opposite wall were dozens of pictures. Not photographs. They were detailed pencil drawings. They were of me. Me working on my computer. Me watching TV. Me sleeping on the sofa. There was even a drawing of me inspecting the small holes in the window frames. He had been watching me through those holes, and then, while I slept, he would emerge from his hiding place and walk freely through my house, studying me like a test subject. Suddenly, I heard a sound from the front door, the sound of a key turning in the lock. My heart stopped. I didn't have time to run upstairs. I didn't have time to call the police. My only reflex was to back up, crawl into that disgusting space myself, and pull the wall panel shut, leaving a tiny crack to see through. I held my breath, my body trembling in the foul-smelling darkness. I heard the front door open and heavy footsteps stepped inside. He was home. From the crack, I could see a part of the living room. The man walked into view. He looked older and more tired than in the video, with graying hair and deep-set eyes. He took off his soaking wet jacket and threw it on a chair, leaving a dark patch on the fabric. Then he walked toward the kitchen. I could hear the refrigerator open, the clinking of bottles. Every movement he made was slow, methodical, as if this was his nightly routine. I knew I couldn't stay here. He would soon realize something was wrong. The camera, the shifted wall panel. I had only one chance. My phone was still in my pocket, but I didn't dare move to get it. The slightest sound could be the end of me. The man returned to the living room, holding an apple. He sat down in the armchair, the one I had sat in just hours before, and began to eat slowly, his eyes staring into space. My heart hammered in my chest, its sound seeming to echo in the cramped space. I had to act now while he was distracted. I slowly backed away, trying not to make a sound. Luckily, the floor in the hidden space was bare concrete. When he bit into the apple, the crisp sound covered the small rustle I made as I moved. There was a small ventilation duct near the floor, probably leading to the basement. It was my only hope. I crawled across the floor, my body aching with tension. I reached the vent. The grate was held in place by 4 rusted screws. I used my fingernails to pry them off one by one, each movement slow and agonizing. Finally, the grate came loose. The passage was narrow and dusty, but I squeezed through. I crawled through the darkness, cobwebs clinging to my face, until I fell onto the cold basement floor. From upstairs, I heard a loud noise, the sound of a chair being knocked over. He had noticed. I heard hurried, angry footsteps. I didn't waste a second. I scrambled toward the small basement window, the kind just big enough for ventilation. I pushed it open with all my strength, breaking the latch. I climbed out, tearing my shirt and scraping my arms and legs on the rough window frame. When I stood up on the damp grass, I didn't dare look back. I just ran. I ran across the backyard into the dark forest, branches whipping at my face. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where the streetlights looked like beacons of safety. I stood there, panting, trembling, and finally managed to pull out my phone to call the police. The police arrived, surrounded the house, but he was gone. The hiding place in the wall was still there, along with his drawings and personal items. They discovered he had entered through an unsecured basement window and built his secret dwelling, even before I moved in. He had been a construction worker on this development, and had apparently become obsessed with this particular house. He had chosen it for himself. I never went back to that house. I sold it at a loss, unable to bear the thought of sleeping under the same roof where a stranger had lived in the walls, watching my every move. I had survived, but my sense of security died that night. Months later, the police caught him in another town, trying to do the same thing in another newly built house. They said he had no clear motive, just a sick compulsion to invisibly invade other people's lives. Even now, sometimes at night, in my new apartment in a bustling city, I still wake with a start. In the silence, I feel like I can hear a soft breath, coming from somewhere in the darkness, from a place where no one should be. And I realize that although I escaped that house, a part of it, a part of that horror, will live inside me forever. You can change the locks, you can move away, but you can never truly erase the memory of having your safest space violated from within. I've never been one to believe in omens, but when I signed the lease for apartment 1408, a passing chill went through me that I quickly dismissed. It was just excitement, I told myself. After months of searching, I had finally found the perfect place, a studio apartment in the Apex building, a newly constructed tower of glass and steel that loomed over the heart of the city. Everything was brand new, from the lingering smell of paint on the walls to the soft hum of the high-speed elevator. My apartment was on the 14th floor, a compact space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a sea of glittering city lights at night. It was like living in a postcard from the future. The building was nearly empty. I was one of the first tenants, and most of the other floors were still being finished. That silence at first felt peaceful. I had moved here to start over, to escape the noise of my past. This emptiness was a clean slate. The first few days passed in a blur of unpacking. I assembled furniture, hung pictures, and arranged books on shelves. The apartment slowly began to bear my mark. I established routines: morning coffee by the window, long hours of work on my laptop, and quiet evenings with a book. I felt secure. The building's security system was top of the line, with smart locks, cameras in every hallway, and a 24/7 security guard in the lobby. No one could get in here without a trace. The first anomaly occurred in the second week. It was so small it was almost insignificant. I have a habit, an almost obsessive one, of placing my coffee mug on a specific coaster at the corner of my kitchen counter. One morning I woke up to find it in the middle of the counter. I frowned, assuming I had been absent-minded the night before. Perhaps I was just too tired after a long day of work. I put it back in its place and thought nothing more of it. But then other small things started happening. A book I was halfway through was placed face down when I was certain I had used a bookmark. The thermostat, which I always set to 22 degrees Celsius, was turned down to 18 degrees overnight. I blamed the building's glitchy smart home system. New technology can be erratic, but a sense of unease began to creep into my mind, like a tiny crack in the perfect glass of my window. A feeling that I wasn't truly alone, even in the empty silence of the apartment. That night I woke up for no apparent reason. The room was dark, illuminated only by the distant neon glow of the city. Everything was still. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something. My wardrobe door, the one I always shut tight before going to bed, was now ajar. Just a small gap, a strip of darkness deeper than the rest of the room. And from within, I had the feeling that someone was looking out. I tried to rationalize everything. A draft? The settling of wood in a new building? But the apex was built to be airtight. There were no drafts. And that wardrobe door was heavy. It didn't open on its own. The next morning, with the daylight chasing away the fear, I slammed the door shut. I told myself I was just stressed, that the loneliness in a new city was making me imagine things. To prove it, I started a little experiment. Before leaving the apartment for work, I took photos of everything with my phone. The position of the TV remote, the way I folded the blanket, the order of my shoes on the rack. I needed concrete proof that I was just losing my mind. That evening, when I returned, the apartment looked exactly the same. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling foolish. I compared the reality with the pictures on my phone. Everything matched. The remote, the blanket, the shoes. I laughed at myself, until I went into the bathroom. My toothbrush, which I always placed to the left of the faucet, was now on the right, and it was slightly damp, as if it had been used not long ago. A chill ran down my spine. It was something I hadn't photographed. It was too small, too personal. But I knew. I knew where I put my toothbrush. The fear was no longer a vague feeling. It became sharp and cold. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had been here while I was away, moving very small things, almost taunting me. I reported it to the building's management. A tired-looking man named Mr. Henderson listened with polite skepticism. He assured me the security system was impenetrable. He checked the security camera logs, and no one had entered my floor besides me. He also checked the logs for my smart lock. Only my fingerprint and my code had been used. He suggested that maybe I should get more rest. I left his office feeling both angry and helpless. They thought I was crazy. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the sofa staring at the door, listening to every little sound the building made. Around 3 a.m. I decided I needed some air. The balcony was my sanctuary. I opened the sliding glass door and stepped outside. The night air was cool, but as I took a deep breath, a strange scent wafted by. The faint stale smell of cigarette smoke. I don't smoke. And with the distance between the balconies, there was no way the smell could have drifted from a neighbor. I turned to go back inside, my heart pounding. I closed and locked the balcony door, and that's when I saw it. On the floor, right next to the track of the sliding door, was something that didn't belong. A single extinguished cigarette butt. It hadn't been there before. I knew it for a fact. Someone hadn't just been in my apartment. They had been here, standing on my balcony, smoking and looking out at the city. And maybe they were still somewhere very close. The evidence of the cigarette butt changed everything. I no longer doubted myself. In its place was a cold fear and an iron resolve. If the management wouldn't believe me, I would find the truth myself. I started to think like an intruder. How could someone get in and out of a supposedly secure apartment without leaving a trace? Not through the front door, not through the window on the 14th floor. So what was left? I began to obsessively inspect my apartment, knocking on walls, checking appliances. I remembered stories about secret passages in old houses, but this was a modern building. There were no such things here. Or were there? An idea sparked in my mind. The building was still under construction. There might be unfinished areas, access ways that only the construction workers would know about. I went online and searched for the blueprints of the Apex building. Most were glossy promotional materials, but after hours of digging through architectural forums and public records, I found a set of preliminary technical drawings. I spent the night studying them, comparing them to the layout of my apartment. And then I found it. A small discrepancy. According to the drawings, a large ventilation shaft ran along the wall behind my wardrobe, but in my apartment that wall looked seamless. There was no vent grate, no access panel. My heart racing, I pulled the heavy wardrobe away from the wall. The wall behind it looked perfectly normal. I almost gave up, thinking I was wrong. But as I ran my hand along the surface, my fingers felt a faint outline, a faint rectangle. I pushed against it. Nothing. I pushed harder. A soft click sounded and a section of the wall receded inward, revealing a dark, narrow space. It was a service corridor, cramped and dusty with pipes and wires running along the walls. It wasn't on any of the public-facing blueprints. A secret passageway that ran through the entire building, hidden behind the walls of the apartments. That was how he got in. He didn't break in. He had been inside the whole time. A wave of horror washed over me. This man didn't just visit. He could be living in these walls. He could be listening to me right now. I stared into the darkness, and from deep within, I could smell that familiar stale cigarette smoke. And I knew with a chilling certainty that he would be back tonight. I didn't call the police. What would I tell them? That I found a secret passage in my wall? That I felt someone was there? They would think I was delusional, just like the management. I was on my own. The fear inside me had transformed into something else, a cold calm. He thought this was his territory. Tonight I would show him he was wrong. I pushed the wardrobe back into place, leaving a small gap just big enough to watch the entrance. I turned off all the lights in the apartment except for a small lamp in the kitchen, which cast long, strange shadows. Then I sat in the darkest corner of the living room, a heavy wrench I'd found in my toolbox in my hand, and I waited. Hours passed in silence. Every creak of the building made me jump. I fought against exhaustion, against the urge to run. But I couldn't. This was my home. I would not be driven out by a phantom who lived in the walls. Just before dawn, I heard it, a faint scratching sound from behind the wardrobe. Then a low thud as the panel was pushed open. I held my breath. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness. He wasn't large, nor was he scary in a conventional way. He was just a man, perhaps my age, dressed in dirty work clothes. He moved with a terrifying familiarity, as if this was his home. He walked into the living room, his eyes scanning my belongings. Then he stopped, turning toward the kitchen. He walked to the refrigerator and opened it. The light from inside illuminated his face, a pale, emotionless face. He took out my carton of milk and drank straight from it. That was the moment my calm shattered. The brazen violation, the arrogance, ignited a rage in me. I stood up, the wrench cold in my hand. He heard the movement and turned. Our eyes met. There was no surprise in his, only a cold annoyance, as if I were an insect disturbing his peace. He lunged at me. I swung the wrench with all my strength. A violent and desperate struggle unfolded in the darkness. It wasn't a clean fight. It was clumsy, primal. We crashed to the floor, knocking over furniture. He was stronger, but I fought with the fury of a cornered person. He grabbed my throat and I felt the air cut off. As my vision started to blur, I swung the wrench one last time, aiming for anything I could hit. He collapsed. I stumbled to my feet, gasping for air. I didn't stay to see if he was alive or dead. I ran out of the apartment, down the emergency stairs, not daring to wait for the elevator. I ran out of the building and never looked back. The police later found him. He was a construction worker who had been fired during the building's construction. He had discovered the service passages and decided to make them his home, living like a hidden parasite behind the building's luxurious facade. He had been doing this in several empty apartments, but I was the first person to actually move in. He enjoyed watching me, Enjoyed the feeling of power that came from moving through my private space undetected. I survived, but I lost something in apartment 1408, the feeling of safety. Now I live in a small house in the suburbs, an old house with thin walls. Sometimes at night when the house is quiet, I still hear noises, creaks, scratches. And I can't help but wonder with a familiar dread what truly lies behind the walls. That was the moment my calm shattered. The brazen violation, the arrogance ignited a rage in me. I stood up, the wrench cold in my hand. He heard the movement and turned. Our eyes met. There was no surprise in his, only a cold annoyance, as if I were an insect disturbing his peace. He lunged at me. I swung the wrench with all my strength. A violent and desperate struggle unfolded in the darkness. It wasn't a clean fight. It was clumsy, primal. We crashed to the floor, knocking over furniture. He was stronger, but I fought with the fury of a cornered person. He grabbed my throat and I felt the air cut off. As my vision started to blur, I swung the wrench one last time, aiming for anything I could hit. He collapsed. I stumbled to my feet, gasping for air. I didn't stay to see if he was alive or dead. I ran out of the apartment, down the emergency stairs, not daring to wait for the elevator. I ran out of the building and never looked back. The police later found him. He was a construction worker who had been fired during the building's construction. He had discovered the service passages and decided to make them his home, living like a hidden parasite behind the building's luxurious facade. He had been doing this in several empty apartments, but I was the first person to actually move in. He enjoyed watching me, enjoyed the feeling of power that came from moving through my private space undetected. I survived, but I lost something in apartment 1408, the feeling of safety. Now I live in a small house in the suburbs, an old house with thin walls. Sometimes at night when the house is quiet, I still hear noises, creaks, scratches. And I can't help but wonder with a familiar dread what truly lies behind the walls. My name is David. At 30, after receiving a small inheritance from a late aunt, I decided to leave the suffocation of the city and buy a house in the suburbs. It was an impulsive decision, driven by the desire for a quiet space to focus on my job. The house I chose was on a gentle slope at the end of a road called Willow Creek Lane. It wasn't large, but it had a quaint old-world charm with faded red brick walls and an overgrown garden that had long been neglected. To me, it was a blank canvas, a place to start over. The first few weeks passed in a blur of activity. I cleaned, repainted walls, and tried to tame the wild garden. The house slowly began to bear my mark. I set up my office in an attic room with a window overlooking the valley below. During the day, sunlight flooded the room, and at night I could see the twinkling lights of the distant town. I felt a sense of peace, a feeling I hadn't had in years. The first anomaly occurred on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working on my laptop when I felt a cold draft on the back of my neck, even though the window was shut. I shivered and chalked it up to the drafts of an old house. But then I noticed my coffee cup on the desk. I was certain I had placed it to the right of the keyboard, but now it was on the left, a little closer to the edge of the table. I frowned, trying to recall if I had unconsciously moved it. I must have. The mind plays tricks on you like that sometimes. I tried to push it out of my head and continued working. But a few days later, something else happened. I have a habit of leaving my house keys on a small ceramic dish right by the front door. That morning, I couldn't find them. After a frantic 10-minute search, I found them on the kitchen windowsill, a place I never put them. This time, the feeling of unease wasn't so easily dismissed. This house, my sanctuary, seemed to be whispering that I wasn't entirely alone. Maybe I was mistaken, but the first seed of unease had been planted in my mind. Like a small crack in a perfect wall, the strange occurrences continued, minor but enough to gnaw at my peace of mind. Objects I was sure I had left in one place would appear in another. A book I was halfway through reading, left face down on the coffee table, would now be closed and neatly placed on the shelf. The armchair in the living room, which always faced the window, would sometimes be slightly turned toward the front door, as if someone had just been sitting there and gotten up. I began to question my own sanity. Perhaps the stress of work and the loneliness were affecting me more than I thought. I tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was the foundation settling, causing things to shift. Maybe it was stress-induced forgetfulness. I installed a couple of small security cameras, the kind used for pet monitoring, placing them in the living room and the hallway. I needed proof that I was just imagining things. The first night after installing the cameras, I reviewed the footage with a strange sense of dread. Most of it was just static, empty scenes. But then, at around 3 a.m., I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the footage from the living room, a dark figure darted across the edge of the frame. It was too fast, too blurry to identify, but there was definite movement. I replayed that clip dozens of times. It wasn't an insect or a trick of the light. It had the shape of a person. Fear began to take deeper root. I no longer felt safe in my own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind whistling through the roof made me jump. I started locking my bedroom door at night, a seemingly futile act that offered a sliver of false comfort. The situation escalated a week later. It had been raining heavily all night, and I had been indoors all day. The next morning, as I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, I stopped dead. A thin, nearly dry streak of mud stretched from the back door across the floor and stopped at the base of the staircase. And at the end of the mud streak, clear and unmistakable, was a single bare footprint. It wasn't large, but it was definitely not mine. And in that moment, my doubt vanished, giving way to a cold, primal fear. Someone had been in my house. I called the police. They came, examined the footprint, took my statement, and checked the locks. There were no signs of forced entry. They suggested I might have forgotten to lock the back door, and that perhaps a homeless person had come in to shelter from the rain and then left. The explanation seemed plausible, but it didn't quell my fear. The feeling of being violated was horrifying. After the police left, I decided to do some digging of my own. I needed to know the history of this house, who had lived here before me. The real estate agent had only said the previous owner was an elderly woman named Evelyn Reed, who had moved to a nursing home. But I needed to know more. I spent the day searching online, sifting through public archives and town records. What I found painted a disturbing picture. Evelyn Reed had lived in this house for nearly 50 years. She lived alone after her husband's death and had no children. According to old articles, she was described as an eccentric, a recluse who was intensely attached to her home. One article, interviewing a former neighbor, quoted them as saying Evelyn believed the house had memories and that she was its protector. She had been forced to sell due to financial issues and declining health. She had fought the sale fiercely, but the most chilling detail came from another source, a local history forum. A user had posted about strangely constructed houses in the area and mentioned mine. This person claimed that Evelyn's husband, an architect, had designed the house with a network of secret passages and hidden spaces. He was obsessed with the idea of absolute privacy and security. Most people on the forum dismissed it as an urban legend. With my heart pounding, I found the original blueprints for the house on the county's archival website. I downloaded them and opened them on my computer, comparing them to the house's current layout. At first, everything seemed to match, but then I saw it. A slight discrepancy in the measurements of the wall between my office and the downstairs pantry. A gap about 1 meter wide was unaccounted for in the physical structure. A dead space. The blueprints showed something the current walls were hiding. A void, a secret corridor, and my heart nearly stopped as I realized she had never truly left. The horror washed over me. That woman, Evelyn Reed, was living inside my walls. She had been moving my things, walking through my house at night, leaving muddy footprints. She had been watching me. Every private moment I thought I'd had was an illusion. I was the intruder in my own home. My first instinct was to run, to pack my bags and never look back. But then another feeling rose, anger. This was my house. I had paid for it. I wouldn't be driven out by a living ghost. I needed to take it back. I couldn't confront her directly. I didn't know what she was capable of or if she was armed. I needed a plan. I spent that day observing, listening, trying to pinpoint the entrances to the secret passages. I noticed a loose floorboard under an old rug in the upstairs closet, and what looked like a removable panel behind the bookshelf in my office. Those were her entry and exit points. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness of my living room, holding a metal baseball bat, and waited. The silence of the house was heavy now, pregnant with terrifying possibilities. Around 2 a.m. I heard it, a faint, almost inaudible scraping sound from the direction of my office. I acted. Quickly and quietly, I moved the heavy bookshelf to block that entrance. Then I ran downstairs, got a hammer and the longest nails I had, and nailed the upstairs closet door shut from the outside. I had sealed the exits. She was trapped inside. Then I stepped outside, stood on the cold lawn under the moonlight, and called the police. This time my voice was no longer trembling with fear, but steady with resolve. "There's someone in my house," I said. "They're trapped inside the walls." When the police arrived, they looked at me with skepticism, but I showed them the blueprints and pointed to the areas I had blocked. After some hesitation, they used a crowbar to pry open the panel behind the bookshelf. The dark, dusty space within was revealed, and from the shadows they brought her out. Evelyn Reed, a small, frail woman with matted gray hair, her eyes burning with a wild intensity. She didn't resist. She just looked at me, not with hatred, but with the indignation of a monarch deposed from her throne. They found a makeshift living space in the secret passages. An old mattress, some canned food, bottles of water, and small items of mine she had stolen. A pen, a notebook, a mug, arranged like trophies. She had been living like a rat inside the walls, watching me through tiny, cleverly drilled peepholes. Evelyn Reed was taken to a mental health facility. The story became a piece of local oddity news for a week, then faded. The house was returned to me, silent and empty, but it was no longer mine. The peace was permanently shattered. I survived, but I sold that house. I could never go back. I live in a modern apartment in a different city now, one with no hidden corners or secret histories. But sometimes in the dead of night, I still jolt awake, listening to the sounds in the silence, and I wonder if any wall is truly solid. The real horror isn't what lurks in the shadows, but the realization that safety is just a fragile illusion, and that some walls are never thick